Good morning and welcome to our webinar. Before we begin the presentation, there are a few items to share with you. Thank you for muting your phones during today's session. We will take questions through the chat box. You can access the chat box by clicking on the cartoon thought cloud in the upper left corner of your screen. Enter your question for the moderator there. You may submit your question at any time during the presentation. Now, let's get started. I'm pleased to introduce Pam Van Horn, Director of the School Turnaround Team, and she will introduce today's program. Pam, please go ahead.
Today, the School Improvement Grant Development Team is providing this webinar to assist schools in understanding and using the grant scoring rubric. I will have each member of the grant writing team introduce themselves.
Good morning, Sharon Rita Sanders, Transformation Specialist.
Good morning, Sue Murphy, Transformation Specialist.
Good morning, Jennifer Vargo, Transformation Specialist.
Good morning, Dr. Kelly Washington, Transformation Specialist.
Good morning, Dr. Diane Longstress, Transformation Specialist Coordinator.
The purpose of our presentation is to provide districts and buildings with an overview of the SIG grant scoring rubric. We will be addressing 3 topics today. The first topic will involve an analysis of the 2 types of questions. We will define the 2 types of questions, explain how to use the rubric correctly when scoring each type of question, and explore how to use the rubric to provide coaching comments to your school's grant writing team.
The second topic will involve an explanation of what counts and what doesn't count when scoring the grant application. We will identify components that do not affect scoring, and will explore the structure and limits of the CCIP as they apply to the grant narrative. The third topic will involve a brief overview of the grant scoring events.
Throughout the presentation, we will address your questions. At any time during our presentation, type your question into the dialog box and submit to the moderator. Although this is a webinar about the scoring rubric, please submit any question you have about the SIG grant. As a reminder, this webinar will be recorded and will be available on the ODE website. To locate the new SIG grant webinars and other SIG information, go to the Ohio Department of Education web pages at education.ohio.gov. and use the search keywords School Improvement Grant Competitive. Let's take a look at the 2 types of questions you will find in the grant application. To get the most benefit from this section of the webinar, you should refer to the scoring rubric. Type 1 questions contain a list of criteria that must all be present in the grant application in order for the question to receive any scoring points. Type 2 questions contain a list of criteria that must all be present in the grant application in order for the question to receive the highest score point. In a Type 2 response, if some but not all of the criteria are present, a reduced point value can still be awarded.
To use the rubric with a Type 1 question, begin by reading the list of criteria for that question. Next, read the answer submitted for the Type 1 question. As you find each criterion, check it off on the rubric. Do not look in the responses for other questions. Limit your evaluation to the response associated with the question you are evaluating. Once you have read the entire response, examine your rubric checklist. If you have found every criterion on the list, you would award the points as indicated in the rubric. If you have not found the entire list of criteria, you would not award points to the question. Take one more look at the response just to make sure you have not missed something.
To use the rubric with a Type 2 question, begin by reading the list of criteria for the highest score point that is available for the question. Next, read the answer submitted for the Type 2 question. As you find each criterion, check it off on the rubric. Again, do not look in the responses for other questions. Limit your evaluation to the response associated with the question you are evaluating. Once you are done reading, you would award the highest score point only if every criterion has been located as indicated. If you have not found the entire list of criteria, move to the next available score point on the rubric. Perform the same analysis and work down the rubric score points until you find the highest score point where all criteria are met. To help your school's grant writers compose a complete answer to a Type 1 or Type 2 question, encourage the grant writing team to read the rubric's list of criteria before beginning to write. Once the question is written, assist the grant writers in scoring their own work by applying the method outlined in the previous slides. You can also train other staff, school staff, to read and evaluate questions that they have not written. In any approach, encourage grant writers to use the check-off approach when writing and evaluating their answers. Encourage grant writers to develop an answer which addresses the criteria in the same order as they are listed on the rubric. This will help the grant writers to quickly locate each criteria in the response. Finally, perform this coaching exercise with enough time to allow grants writing teams the opportunity to make revisions to their answers before the deadline. Now that we have reviewed the use of the rubric for scoring and coaching, let's take a look at what doesn't count when scoring the SIG grant. It is generally accepted practice to ensure that written material is error-free. For the purpose of the SIG grant, errors in spelling, grammar, and punctuation do not result in a loss of points. Since these errors can sometimes weaken the message you are trying to convey, proofreading is still a good idea.
In many cases, it is generally accepted practice to avoid abbreviations, spell out numbers rather than use Arabic numerals, use complete sentences, and place two spaces after the end of one sentence and the beginning of another. The application in the CCIP will only allow a certain amount of characters in a text box. For this reason, the use of abbreviations, numbers, sentence fragments, and the avoidance of extra keystrokes will not result in a loss of points. Once again, consider the strength of your message as you consider the use of space-saving techniques.
On April 17, 2014, your grants will be scored. We will use the methods explained in this webinar to train the grant scorers. Each building submitting an application must send in the name of a scorer and an alternate. A scorer must be present on April 17, 2014 in order for the grant to be considered. Buildings without a scorer present on April 17, 2014 will not be funded. The district can select any person to be a scorer. ODE would prefer that the grant scorers have a background in teaching and learning and also have knowledge of the grant application.
The grant scoring event will be held at the Delaware Area Career Center, 4565 Columbus Pike, Delaware, Ohio. Grant scorers should be seated and ready to begin scoring at 9 a.m. The registration table for the scoring event will be available by 8:15 a.m. The scoring event should conclude by 4 p.m.
At this time, we would like to address any questions that our webinar participants have submitted. Currently, we have one question submitted. The question is, has a Type 1 or a Type 2 question been defined?
And to answer that, I'll say that when you look at your scoring rubric, you will notice that some questions offer a score point of 6 and then a score point of 0. That is a Type 1 question. Some questions offer a score point of 6, 3, 1, and 0, or some combination of point values. That would be a type 2 question. In order for you to determine which question type you're looking at, consult the scoring rubric.
We want to remind all of our participants that you may submit your question in the cartoon cloud on the left side of the toolbar on your screen on the web interface. Feel free to go ahead and submit your question to the moderator there. We will pause for a brief moment as you have time to type in your question.
Since there aren't any other questions, this concludes the question and answer part of our webinar. Thank you for participating in our SIG grant scoring webinar. Have a great day.